this video, I want to take a look at how we can use a graphing calculator to deal with some of the correlation related problems that we've been looking at. The first thing I want to do is look at the problem that we're dealing with. The problem states that this table down here shows the percentage of third grade students proficient in reading and math in 10 states. So we have California, Texas, New York, Florida, and so on. And it shows the percentage of students in third grade that are proficient in reading and the corresponding percentage that are proficient in math. We want to compute the correlation coefficient, compute the least squares regression line, and then use the least squares regression line to make a prediction where we'll predict math proficiency in New Mexico if the reading proficiency here is 65%. So we'll use this data, use the least squares regression line to try to make a prediction about the math score in New Mexico given the reading score. So that's the idea. To do this problem, we're going to use the calculator, and there's one thing that we have to do before we actually jump into the problem. So I will turn on the calculator, and we need to turn on some functionality within the calculator. The calculator will spit out the correlation coefficient for us if we do some certain things, but only if we turn on this functionality within the calculator. So basically, if you try to do this problem without doing what I'm about to do, it will not give you the value of R that we need to complete part A. So what we have to turn on is in the catalog. You can see the catalog is down here. It's the second option of the 0 button. So if I hit second 0, it'll take me into the catalog. We can scroll up and down, but what we need to do is get all the way down to where the D's are, right? It's alphabetical. It starts with the A's. We need to get down to the D's. The fastest way to get there is to click this button right here, which you can see corresponds to the letter D. So if I click that, it'll take me down to the D's. Then I don't have to go as far. So I'll scroll down until I see a command that says diagnostic on. So here it is, diagnostic on. I'm going to hit enter. Hit enter again, and it'll tell me done. We've turned on the diagnostics. Essentially what this has done is it's going to force the calculator to print to the screen some of the calculations that it normally just does in the background. So for example, we're going to find the least squares regression line. In the background, to do that, the calculator will compute the value of R, the correlation coefficient, but it won't print that out to the screen for us to read unless we turn this option on. We do not need to do this again. Once we've done it once on our calculator, it stays on basically until the next time your computer dies and the battery replaced and if the memory gets wiped or anything like that. If you have to reset your calculator, you might have to do this again. But otherwise, once you've done it once, it should last us the whole semester. Okay, so my diagnostics are on. Let me just clear the screen. In fact, we don't even need to do that. I want to enter the data from this list into the calculator. So I'm going to hit the stat button and go to edit, and I'm going to enter in the data that we need. If you want to clear an entire list, what you can do is go up to where it highlights the name of the list, and if you hit clear and hit enter, it will clear the entire list, and you don't have to delete the entries one at a time. So we've deleted all the entries in list 1. I'm going to enter in list 1 all the values for reading here. So the first number is 60, then 73, 75, and so on. So let me just enter these. Hopefully I don't make a mistake. Last one is 71. And I can verify just to make sure, hit enter, that I entered the right number. I know it's supposed to be 10 states. If I go up and highlight this last number I entered, sure enough, it tells me I entered 10 things. So I at least didn't skip any or do any extra. But we can go through and just double check. I'm going to just trust that I got them all correct this time. 60, 73, 75, 66, 75, 79, 79. So far, so good. I'm going to trust that I did it correctly. Now I'm going to do the second list, 59, and I'm going to just do them in L2. So 59, enter, 78, 70, 68, 70, 77, 76, 66, 64, 73. Okay, sure enough, again, the lists match up. These lists need to be the same size. Remember, these are a list of ordered pairs. Coming over to the numbers here, what we're going to do when we do the least squares regression line is I'm going to treat reading as my x and math as my y. So this is going to be my input variable and my output variable, so to speak. So let me get that back where we can see the whole thing. Okay, so coming back to the calculator, I've entered all the data. What I'm going to do now is hit the stat button again, and I'm going to come over to the calculations. So I'll scroll over to the calculations, and what I'm going to do is go down and select either option 4 or option 8. You notice option 4 says linreg ax plus b. That stands for linear regression. We're doing linear regression, the least squares regression line. That's exactly what we're doing. If I scroll down to option 8, you'll see that it's very similar. It says linreg a plus bx. This is the option I'm going to use just because it's the one that the book uses. So if you're reading the book, it will say to use this option. Both of them will work. The only difference is when it spits out the coefficients for our least squares regression line. Up here in the first one, a is going to be the slope, whereas down in this one, b is the slope. We just need to check which coefficient, which letter is multiplying the x, and we know that's the slope, and that the other one must be the y-intercept. So you can pick 4 or 8. I'm going to select 8 just because that's what our book does, but it doesn't matter. At this point, it'll ask me which list I want to use for x and which list I want to use for y. So we just said x is going to be the reading scores. I put those in list 1, so I'm going to leave that as list 1. The y list are the math scores. I put those in L2. I'm going to leave that as L2. The frequency list, I'm going to leave blank. I just want to use one of each of these. And then I want to go down to calculate. I'm going to leave both of these other options in here blank. So I'm going to hit calculate, hit enter, and it'll tell me done. So it spits out a bunch of information. The first thing I need is the last number it spits out. It spits out R for us. R is the correlation coefficient. So looking at this number right here, this is our answer to part A. Turns out our correlation coefficient is R is approximately equal to 0.809 if I were to round it to 3 decimals. So I'll call that about 0.809. If I round, I'd have to round that 8 up to a 9 based on the 6 here. So that looks like it's pretty strong correlation, which is what we might expect. In scores where school is good overall, both reading and math should be strong, and in states where school funding is lower or there's more poverty, you would expect scores to be lower in both cases. You wouldn't expect scores to be high in reading and low in math, or vice versa, just by total randomness. The scores should kind of go in the same direction together. So we did indeed get a fairly strong positive correlation because this number is positive and fairly close to 1. We also have everything we need to compute the least squares regression line. It spit out the line for us. It says our line is y equals a plus bx, where this is the value of a we should be using, and this is the value of b that we should be using. So for us, when I rewrite this down, I'm going to just remember I'm going to use the y with the little hat over it to distinguish it from this y that we're using for the math scores. But I'm otherwise just going to copy down. I'm going to do a plus bx, where this is what I'll plug in for a, and this is what I'll plug in for b. So my a is 11.036. So there's my a plus b times x. B is 0.88. Sorry, no, not 88. Let me reread that again. 8226 and so on. I'll round it to 3 decimals, so 0.82. That 2 has to be rounded up to 3, so 0.823 times, remember, this b has to multiply x. So coming back over here, I've added an x in. You need to have an equation of a line. The x is important. You can't leave the x off. This term is 0.823 times x. I can't combine these terms, so I can't add 0.823 to the 11.036. This, as it's written, is the equation of the line. It needs to have y equals mx plus our b. So here's sort of our m and our b in our mx plus b. They're just using different letters. So this is where it gets confusing. You're used to in an algebra class, y equals mx plus b. In the book, they use y equals b0 plus b1x, and on the calculator, they're using y equals a plus bx. Just note the name we use for the letters, the slope and the y-intercept, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I call it b0 or m or just b like it's written here. Just keep in mind, whatever one is multiplying x, that is the slope. Whatever one is not multiplying x, that is the y-intercept. So I have these two pieces now. And I can now use this to make a prediction for the math proficiency in New Mexico. So what I'm going to use is for in our New Mexico, the y hat that we're going to get is going to be 11.036 plus 0.823 times x. What do I plug in for x? Well, you'll recall x were the reading scores for each state. And I have just told us that the reading score in New Mexico is 65. So the percentage here is 65. So I'd plug in the number 65 right here. And we can do that back over here on the calculator real quickly if we want to get this last answer. It's just going to be a number. So let me go back to the main screen. I can do that by hitting second quit. Oh, incidentally, I should go back to that. Jump the gun on that. This value right here, r squared, this is the value that's important if you're doing section 4.3 from our textbook. So just keep this number in mind when you're doing section 4.3. This is the number that you'll wind up needing there. It's the square of the correlation coefficient that we just found. And its meaning is a little bit different, as you'll see if you look into that section. So just keep that in mind as well. We've used the a and the b for our least squares regression line. We used r for the correlation coefficient. And this last piece right here, this r squared, that's for section 4.3 from our book. Okay, now let me quit back to the main screen and plug this into the calculator. So it's 11.036 plus 0.823 times 65. And our calculator is nice. It will do the order of operations for us. It'll automatically do this multiplication before it does this addition. But if you have any doubts, you can always toss parentheses around things to try to take care of that as well. So let's hit enter. And what we wind up with is, looks like 64.5-ish%. So I would say approximately, change these to approximate symbols, approximately 64.5%. This is our best guess. So it's our guess for math proficiency in New Mexico. Based on the data that's available to us. We have data for all the other states, not for New Mexico. Here's our best guess based on the relationship, the correlation between the values for all the other states that we do have information on. So this is how you deal with correlation on a TI-84 graphing calculator. The last thing I should mention, just real quickly, is back here in step B. If you have an older calculator, I can't remember if it will necessarily give you the full list of everything that we've got. So if you have an older calculator, what you would do is go to stat. After you've entered all your data, you'd go to stat, you'd go to the calculations, you'd go down to option 4 or option 8, and hit select. And what it would do is it would bring up to the screen something that looked like this: linreg a plus bx. And then it would have a parenthesis and a cursor flashing, waiting for you to enter stuff here. And what you would enter is simply L1, comma L2. And just remember that to get the L1 button, it's the second option of the number 1. And for L2, it's the second option of the number 2. So you'd hit the second button and then 1 to get this L1 right here. After you have this, hit enter, and it should spit out the same screen that we just saw a minute ago, where we have all of this information right here. So this is only if you have an older calculator where it doesn't give you the menu option that I just showed you a minute ago. Keep that in mind.